Welcome back, boys and girls, to Mighty Ride Junkies. If you missed the title or came across this video on a whim, this is the third part of the history of Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios Hollywood. So you probably want to watch the first two videos before watching this. Or not. I would never tell you what to do. Now go hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video. Starting from where we left off with 2012. This year brought on a first for Halloween Horror Nights that would later become a reoccurring theme at Universal Studios Hollywood. Based off the AMC show The Walking Dead, Universal introduced The Walking Dead Dead Inside, where guests would travel through Harrison Memorial Hospital, see the famous Don't Open Dead Inside door, before traveling through more iconic moments from the first season. Little fun trivia for the Walking Dead fans out there. Have you ever wondered how long Rick Grimes was actually in a coma for? Well, according to comic creator Robert Kirkman, Rick was in a coma for 4 to 5 weeks after being shot. The Walking Dead also took over the Terror Tram that year with Terror Tram Invaded by the Walking Dead. This year's tagline was, "Once you're inside, there's no way out." This tagline is pretty interesting considering the theme for the mazes holds true to it. For instance, take The Walking Dead. If you're caught up on the show or just read the comics, you'll know The Walking Dead is not referring to the zombies, but rather the current survivors, as it's learned no matter how you die, you will eventually be turned into a walker. No escaping your fate. There were also two other mazes that strongly went with this tagline. Metal god Alice Cooper returned to Halloween Horror Nights with Alice Cooper Goes to Hell. Can't really escape hell once you're there unless you're Dante Alighieri, a famous poet who works included the Divine Comedy. Part 1 of the Divine Comedy was Dante's Inferno, the story of a man who travels through the layers of hell. This is what Alice Cooper's maze is based off of. After you pass the very famous words of "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," you'll travel down the layers of hell such as Dante did, but with Cooper's album Go to Hell playing in the background. The next maze was Welcome to Silent Hill, based off the 2006 and 2012 films that were inspired by the popular video game franchise. Guests would find themselves entering Silent Hill at night when all the fun happens. You would try to escape only to get an up-close encounter with the infamous Pyramid Head. Trying to recapture the event's 2007-2008 greatness, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre returned with The Saw is the Law, rehashing some elements used from the films and previous maze, but mainly using completely new parts that hadn't been seen before at Universal. The maze did not get the credit the original maze got. I mean, if you think about it, the original maze took all the best parts from the films, and all that was left were scenes that weren't as iconic, leaving this year's Texas Chainsaw Massacre maze with very little to work with in originality unless bringing something back that had already been done. La Llorona also returned with a slightly different maze design and got a different name, La Llorona the Children Hunter. And of course, House of Horror was renamed or rethemed to Universal Monsters Remix, where guests would encounter the classic Universal monsters, but in a remix of their classic music with today's mainstream music, or at least the music of 2012. Now on to 2013, which holds a very special place in my heart. You see, this year and 2008 were probably my favorite Halloween Horror Night years. Now, 2013 didn't look like much at first glance, but it was inside their mazes that packed the punch. The tagline, "This is what fear tastes like," couldn't be closer to the truth. First, let's cover The Walking Dead, as they again were the main theme for this year. Walking Dead Terror Tram returned with the same name from 2012. But this year, they did bring a new maze called The Walking Dead No Safe Haven. The maze would take you through the Georgia Correctional Facility that the gang was in from the 3rd and 4th seasons, as well as certain parts of Woodbury. Universal Monsters Remix wasn't exactly the most popular maze. However, it was the most popular one to retheme House of Horrors, since House of Horrors started getting its retheme for Halloween Horror Nights. So it returned as Universal Monsters Remix Resurrection. Now, onto the highlight mazes, starting with Evil Dead Book of the Dead. As a massive fan of the original Evil Dead films, I waited a long time for a true Evil Dead maze. Not Scary Farm kinda did something in retheming their log ride in 2012, but failed on some serious opportunities. So, when Universal Studios announced Evil Dead would finally be getting its own maze, I was ecstatic, until I learned it would be based off the remake instead of the original films. Creators and casting personnel alike for Universal Studios had said many times before that making an Evil Dead maze based on the original would be pretty hard, if not impossible, because of how hard it would be to find enough people that look like the main man, Ash Williams. So the announcement was a bit of a letdown for me. That was until I actually saw the remake and saw how scary it actually was. And the maze didn't fail to deliver on that. It gave the guests basically a complete walkthrough of the movie in maze form all the way to the finale, where you would find yourself a part of the raining blood scene and it drenched you. Obviously being just water, the effect with the scene taking place in front of you stands out very heavily in my memories. Insidious Into the Further might not be everyone's favorite maze or franchise, but this was the one maze I was most excited for, being a huge fan of Lee Winnell's work. If you guys don't know who this is, I suggest you look him up. He very much will be tossed in with names like Wes Craven, Stephen King, and John Carpenter in his later years. His most famous works include Insidious, where he also acted in it as Specs, and he was one of the madmen behind the Saw films, which he also appeared in the first one as Adam. Anyways, Insidious Into the Further took people through the first two films and into the spirit world called The Further. Guests would find themselves in constant encounters with the lipstick-faced demon, the bride in black, and other unfriendly spirits. This maze actually managed to get a jump scare out of me, which rarely happens. Now, what does a powerhouse metal band do when it's about to release their 19th studio album, and the fact that they're bringing back their original singer, Mr. Prince of Darkness himself, Ozzy Osbourne? Get their own Halloween maze, of course, and completely base it off their newest album. Black Sabbath released 13, what is assumed to be their last studio album, and brought back Ozzy as their lead singer. It was no surprise the album hit #1 on multiple charts. Black Sabbath became the newest metal band to get its own maze. With the album playing in the background, guests were taken into the metal hell world, where it did its best to make you feel like you were in one of Black Sabbath's music videos of old. But, and here comes my opinion, by far the best maze of this year was El Cucuy, the Boogeyman. While the Boogeyman is an international legend, Universal chose to use the Mexican folklore version of this story. The maze puts you in the mindset well into the line queue, as Danny Trejo would narrate the legend of El Cucuy.
Some people say that he is a shadow, a ghost, an evil spirit that can change forms and become whatever you fear the most.
Once inside the maze, you'd enter the bedrooms belonging to the disobedient and lazy children, whose bedrooms showed the evidence they had been abducted by El Cucuy. Eventually, you would travel to El Cucuy's cave, where I must admit has been the only part in any maze that has scared me in a long time. The cave was designed so perfectly, and so much was going on in each part of the cave, it was impossible to pay attention to every little detail, meaning the scare actors had easy targets. You would also find out what happened to all those children. I think this is the major part that got to me. While dealing with the eerie music, trying to look out for scare talent, admiring the detail in the cave, and seeing the actors betraying children being tortured actually got to me a little. This maze unfortunately only lasted a year, but this maze could have easily gone another year at Horror Nights. This maze is easily in my top 3 of all time from this event. Before we move on to 2014, let's talk about how Universal Studios Hollywood got some heat from their longtime show, BiLL&Ted's Excellent Adventure. If you're unfamiliar with the show, it's a dark comedy based on the characters from the film, but dealing with issues that happened from the current year. The show was very funny and pushed the envelope a lot, especially when comparing it to the next door neighbor's Not Scary Farm show, The Hanging, which basically had the same premise, except it was in the Old West. The show came under fire by one writer who had a semi-big enough fan base, claiming that homophobia was present in the show. The fan base was able to get enough traction to address Universal higher-ups. With about 2 weeks left for Halloween Horror Nights that year, Universal announced they were canceling the BiLL&Teds show, which ended up being permanent as the show hasn't and probably never will return to Halloween Horror Nights in Hollywood. The same show was still present in the Orlando park up until an announced farewell tour at the 27th Halloween Horror Nights in 2017. But with every good, amazing, one-of-a-kind year comes the letdown, mildly entertaining, and uneventful year, which of course was 2014. Invaded by the Walking Dead returned for a record third year to the Terror Tram, as if this attraction wasn't repetitive enough. Also, a slightly altered Walking Dead maze from last year was renamed End of the Line. But what made the event worse, minus the little to no change Walking Dead mazes, was the year also brought count 'em, three forgettable mazes. The first being From Dusk Till Dawn, based on the TV series I have never seen and probably never will. This maze should have been based off the Robert Rodriguez film instead of the show. It might have been a little bit more popular. Not to mention, it's hard to appreciate the work that's put into the makeup when all the scare talent has on is fangs in their mouth and the occasional glowing eye contacts. The second was based on Universal Studios' second attempt to reboot their movie monsters. The first was the failed Wolfman remake of 2010. Universal was clearly trying to use the following maze, Dracula Untold Reign of Blood, as a sole advertisement for their movie, as the film wasn't even released until mid-October. And if you know anything about the dark universe that Universal has in place, then you know that not only is this movie not a part of it, but it also failed expectations, just like its maze. Lastly, Face Off in the Flesh, a maze based off a reality show. If you haven't seen Face Off before and you're a fan of Halloween or horror movies, I suggest you check it out. People are put up against one another each season with challenges and tasks they must complete in order to possibly win the grand prize. The maze was a celebration of the show, putting the most iconic pieces within it. The downside of this was, if you were aware of the show, you were too busy looking at the details of everything in the sometimes dim-lit room, while an annoying scare talent would attempt to scream at you. The best example I can give to this is it's like being in an art exhibit, but every time you try to look at art, someone attempts to jump scare you, or people behind you are pushing and shoving for you to move forward. Honestly, this should have been an art exhibit rather than a walkthrough maze. I understand what they were trying to do here. It's no different than seeing your favorite movie or TV show turn into a maze, but a lot of these people are trying to make a name for themselves and trying to establish themselves, and you really couldn't truly appreciate their originality because you're being pushed to keep going forward, or you have people trying to distract you. However, the year wasn't all bad. A surprise for cult classic lovers, the 1981 film, An American Werewolf of London, got its own maze, and the animatronics were amazing, and some of the best I've ever seen within a maze. It would have probably made it a stronger hit if people born in the mid-90s and beyond actually knew what the movie was about. Hollywood also made an attempt at an original maze, something it hadn't done in quite a while its sister park Orlando had been doing it for years. Universal Studios Hollywood opened up with a completely original maze that wasn't attached to a franchise or band, a complete entity that was almost completely original. The Hollywood location must be very fearful of original mazes, probably because the original mazes when Halloween Horror Nights first started at the park weren't that successful, because looking on the outside of this, all you would see is Clowns 3D. Upon entering the maze, you couldn't help but notice the similarities between this maze and the 1988 cult classic Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which if you're a fan of Halloween and have never seen this movie, you are truly missing out. But even if you hadn't seen the movie, you may have noticed the original electric guitar riff that was playing in the background. By the time Halloween Horror Nights opened its gates in 2014, the maze name was extended to Clowns 3D, featuring music from Slash. But the last maze of the year definitely goes to the best one, AVP Aliens vs. Predators, based on the Smash franchise. Not only was this the longest line night after night, the amount of detail and scale that was put into the Alien and Predator costumes really made you feel like you were in the middle of their battle or on the set for the newest film. It was nominated for many different Best Maze of the Year awards, and due to its popularity, Universal brought it back the following year. Sadly, the concentration for the 2014 season was heavily on The Walking Dead. Not only did the year's tagline, "Fear will eat you alive," which only really applied to The Walking Dead, House of Horror was shut down before this year's Halloween Horror Nights had begun, in order to make way for a permanent Walking Dead maze. Now, I have nothing against Walking Dead, and I think it's an amazing show and even a more amazing comic. But when you have a maze, year after year, and then close a maze based on the Universal classic movie monsters to make room for a permanent Walking Dead maze, you might get some grumbles from hardcore horror movie fans.
Back to it.
The Walking Dead attraction opened in July in the year of 2016, and after about 3 or 4 times through this maze, it gets old fairly quickly. Taking highlights from the very first Walking Dead maze and using advanced animatronics, it still won't distract you when you notice how short the maze actually is, especially when you compare it to how long the House of Horror used to be. What's worse is how long they made the line queue for this thing. While it does try to be an interactive line queue by putting you in the hospital Rick woke up in from Season 1, when you realize the layout is longer than any other ride in the park, except for Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey, you may see this as a tad ridiculous. "All roads lead to fear" was the slogan for the 2015 Halloween Horror Nights season, and this year saw a lot of firsts. First, a maze that gave birth to sequel mazes within the following years, Halloween Michael Myers Comes Home. True, the Walking Dead mazes could technically be considered sequel mazes, going through season, however, you didn't get a reenactment of the story, rather you were just put through some iconic set pieces. Halloween Michael Myers Comes Home literally told the story of the original Halloween and mixed in scare tactics within the actual story. This maze also had one of my all-time favorite rooms. We've all seen those rooms where there's about 20 skeletons hanging on the wall, but 3 are actually scare actors trying to scare you. But if you know what to look for, you can tell which ones are fake and which ones are real. This wasn't the case for this Halloween room. The set design, props, as well as the lighting played a huge part that left you in a room with 30 or so Michael Myers, and only 2 or 3 being real. I've never seen it so perfectly done that you actually couldn't tell which was real or fake until the scare talent decided it was time to scare you. There are some solid reenactments from the film in this maze as well, including my personal favorite, Michael being shot by Dr. Loomis. The scenes were so well done that the line within the maze was a tad ridiculous even on a slow day, because everyone was stopping to watch the scene play out before moving on. This maze is definitely in my top mazes from Halloween Horror Nights. Walking Dead once again returned with Wolves Not Far, which focused on the latest season of The Walking Dead. And now I'm moving on. Like I mentioned before, Aliens vs. Predator returned and had no upgrades and no change to the maze design whatsoever. Insidious returned with Insidious Return to the Further, which had some references from the first two films, but the maze mainly focused on walking you through the third chapter in the series. And a very forgettable maze from a very forgettable movie, Crimson Peak Maze of Madness attempted to throw you into madness, but really threw you into boredom. But another first happened at Halloween Horror Nights. It got its first maze based off a comedy. This is the End 3D, based off the 2013 movie starring James Franco, Jonah Hill, and Seth Rogen, who were playing James Franco, Jonah Hill, and Seth Rogen. And believe it or not, the maze was actually pretty entertaining. Obviously showing some humorous moments from the film, but also its design and layout was pretty memorable. Walking Dead finally was dethroned on ruling the Terror Tram, and The Purge took over with Survive the Purge. And while the layout still hasn't changed, I must admit, this was the most fitting theme for the tram since the director of 2006. Even though I'm completely used to the path of this layout, the idea of running from people exercising their purge rites and seeing the carnage that was left behind actually fit pretty well with this environment. But probably the biggest surprise of the year was Halloween Horror Nights' new show, Jabberwocky, straight from Las Vegas, Nevada. Nevada? Yeah, who cares? When I heard this was coming to Halloween Horror Nights, I just remember thinking, what the hell does this have to do with Halloween? I remember a lot of friends saying they weren't wasting their time watching this show, and a lot of other confused remarks towards the event during the announcement for the show. But you see, I am one of those people that have to do everything. So, I dragged myself to sit in this show as the final thing of the night, and was blown away. If you don't know what Jabberwocky is, I suggest you check them out on YouTube. They're a pretty good dance group, to say the least. They themed their show into a Halloween-style show that involved one of the characters dreaming or having a nightmare in a hellish world. No lines are spoken, and all emotion is captured through dance or gestures. If that still didn't get you interested, put it this way. I'm not into dance numbers, nor am I into the music that was played at this event. I'm more of a metal guy if you haven't figured that out by now. But the show was so entertaining, I found myself telling my buddies they missed out by skipping the show. So, some food for thought on that. Let me know if you're someone who skipped the Jabberwocky show, or saw it and loved it, or even hated it. Just leave a comment down below letting me know. It's a nice way to pass the time before the next video for Hollywood's Halloween Horror Nights. See you then.